glad to be invited to speak with you all. Although, like Viviana was saying, I'm sad that we even really have to. This doesn't seem like something that we should have to convince anybody of, any of these things. So I just want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the things of what we can do. And I'm coming at this from the perspective of a pediatrician and as a parent. You know, and so obviously there's this has impacts way beyond kids, but kids are what I know. So we're going to take it from this angle. So I think the first thing that I just really want everybody to know is that we don't have to live like this. Like, this shouldn't be normal. So no matter how many things you hear, no matter how many stories you hear, no matter how many times you hear, oh, there's been another mass shooting and 5 people were killed, like, it just kind of rolls off in and out of our heads now, I think, a lot of times, because we're just so used to hearing it. And it should never ever become normal for that to happen, where we just hear it and move on. So it's only appropriate, I think, that that you all are the ones who are bringing me in to talk about this. You all formed in response to a health emergency, and you brought together resources by building strong partnerships. So it only makes sense to me that you'd be willing and equipped to be the ones to fight another public health emergency, which is exactly what firearm violence is. So I'm sure you've probably heard this, but I'm going to say it again, and I'll say it again and again and again. So injuries from guns are the #1 cause of death of children in our country. I'll say it again. Injuries from guns are the #1 cause of death of children in our country. It's not cancer, it's not pneumonia, it's not COVID, it's not RSV, it's not flu, and it's not even car accidents. It is guns. So if you look at the graph, starting from 2020, car accidents in the orange started out much, much higher, obviously. And then those have come down, and deaths from firearms in kids have risen substantially. So you can, as you can know from this graph and this next one, it's getting worse. This was as of 2021. There were about 3,600 deaths of kids from guns. And it's particularly bad here in North Carolina. So the blue line, if you can see it, are deaths per 100,000 in kids 0 to 17. So we've always kind of paralleled the national trend, and then really for the last 3 years or so, we've outpaced the rest of the country. As a kid in North Carolina, you're 51% more likely to die as a result of a gun than you are if you lived in another average state in our country. And I'd like to challenge us that unless we're doing something about it as adults, we're actually all complicit in this, and that our voices can't be silent. So remember our approach to COVID, how we kind of took the approach of needing to flatten the curve, and we were going to use different techniques, whether it be masking or maintaining distance or hand washing, and then eventually vaccinations, altering work styles, things like that. So the same principles apply here. There's not going to be like a single cure, just like cancer. There's not a single cure nor a single prevention, but there's going to be a step-by-step set of things we need to do to help fight this epidemic. So by being here, I assume that most of you agree with me that this is a problem. But in reality, everybody in the United States should be worried about this. So 1 out of every 5 Americans has lost a family member due to gun injury, which is astounding. So we all have a responsibility to act. And when we act, each drop in the bucket matters. There's not going to be one single thing. We're just going to have to do this piecemeal by piecemeal. I don't even think there's going to be a finish line. So we like to compare to other industrialized nations. And, so these other countries that don't have mass shootings, it becomes national or international news when one of them does happen in another location. I'm not even sure that we're ever going to get to that point where it's international news when it happens here. But we at least need to be doing better than we are. So even if we don't make a finish line, that's okay. We just need to be doing better. So it can feel really overwhelming, frustrating, and hopeless. I get it. I feel it too. So in December of 2012, I remember where I was when I learned about the school shooting at Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut. So my daughter was 9 months old at the time, and I remember thinking to myself, well, at least things will be better by the time she's in school and we won't have to worry about this. So here we are now, and you see the graph. So my daughter is 11, and she's had more school lockdowns than field trips, not lockdown drills, actual lockdowns. Those born in 2000 or later are the lockdown generation. The statistics are worse than they were 10 years ago. And while I'm using school shootings as an example, it's important to remember this is actually the real minority of deaths from guns, even in kids. But I think it's just, it just resonates with all of us because we all think of school really needing to be a safe place for our kids.
Brian, can you speak slowlier?
Sure, I'm sorry.
For Angie, thank you.
Absolutely. So part of why I think this is so overwhelming is that we all know that the school shootings are really just the tip of the iceberg, and that beyond that, it's suicides, it's intimate partner violence, and all of the other things as well. So statistics are an important tool because I think they help us with data, and which can eventually help us with policy. But we should never lose track of the individual voices or individual lives that are lost or are stolen, or the families that are impacted. I don't know if any of you are on Twitter, but certainly following the feeds of families that have lost family members to gun violence, it's really just heartbreaking to hear the way this tears them apart every single day. Some of you yourselves or your families may have left places plagued by violence to come here thinking we'd be safe. You and your families deserve better. We all do. We're coming up on the traumatic one-year anniversary of the school shooting in Uvalde at Robb Elementary School. And for what a lot of families, this is going to be their first Mother's Day without their babies coming up. And the way that they see that we're doing nothing is that we see what happened last week in Allen, Texas. We're not making progress. So how are families supposed to think that we're doing all we can? Well, it's serving us as a reminder this problem isn't going away on its own. The good news is it can be better, and we can make it better. Because what we need to do is we need to look at the orange line on this graph, the cars. So guns didn't pass cars because of just the proliferation of guns, is because we've done better with cars. So this is the number of children and teens killed yearly in car crashes. And if you look, we've done really well. Obviously, for any family that's lost their kid in a car crash, this is still heartbreaking. But you look and see the progress we've made here. So, and I think that cars are a good model. So none of this isn't a single straight line from 7,000 to 3,000. This is gradual and incremental. And how did this happen? So research occurred on what features are safe that matter. Advocacy occurred. Data was collected and followed, and driving laws changed. So what can we learn from this? So we can learn from this that we need research, and let that drive policy, and also the role of individual choices. So when we think about research, we need to know what works. We can't just come out with 30,000 recommendations that aren't data-based. Unfortunately, for a long time, from the mid-90s until 2019, federal dollars couldn't be spent on gun violence research because of something called the Dickey Amendment. So as of 2015, there were only 15 senior investigators across the country that had research careers in firearm injury prevention. I was told 10 years ago when I was interested in pursuing that work that I shouldn't, that it would pretty much be a dead end for my career because you weren't going to be able to get federal funding to do it. So this is no longer the case. There's an awesome group of young physicians, particularly pediatricians and other scientists that are gun violence researchers now. They can inform us on what strategies work and which ones don't. And this is going to have a ripple effect. As these researchers mature, they're going to have successful careers, and they're going to have mentees. And they're going to be able to motivate new researchers to study this topic. So I'm really excited for our future. Maybe your own children will be these researchers. I think our kids are motivated to have things get better with it when they become adults. And research can teach us great things and lead to action. So we've learned through research, for instance, that giving gun locks at the same time that we give safe storage education improves people's gun hygiene. In other words, the way that they store their guns, locked and unloaded with ammunition separate. And subsequent studies have built on this to show that if we did this universally, we could save at least 100 kids' lives per year in our country. Research also teaches us what doesn't work. For instance, we know that giving just a coupon for gun locks doesn't work. We actually have to be able to provide the lock. And this is just an example, but it shows that we can't come up with ideas of how to fix this if we can't do research. So number 2 is policy. Laws and regulations do work. Their fines and felony charges are deterrents towards unsafe storage, for instance. There are some that argue that bad guys don't follow laws anyway, quote unquote, and then we need more, quote, good guys with guns. So I'm willing to concede that laws aren't going to prevent every case of death from guns, but it will really help. We can't let perfect be the enemy of good. I don't know how well that translates into Spanish. But what we need to do is make every policy we can, because every life matters that we can save. So even if we can't save every single life, any that we can is really meaningful. Do safer cars prevent every instance of motor vehicle death? Of course not. But that doesn't mean that we haven't made great progress. So in gun violence, for instance, in 1994, there was an assault weapons ban that went into effect for 10 years in the United States. And during that time, mortality from mass shootings went down 60 to 70%, meaning that maybe instead of 5 people dying, 2 people died. That's still not good, right? But that's still better. So that law sunsetted in 2004, and despite some strong efforts, we've been unable to resurrect it. There is a current bill again this year. Unfortunately, last year the Senate didn't decide to bring it to a vote in December. So we do know that states with stricter child access prevention laws have decreased rates of unintentional shootings, decreased risks of suicide in kids. We are not one of those states that has strong laws, but we can advocate for that. Extreme risk protection orders and red flag laws do work. So why are we trying to get rid of them? Background checks do work. This is especially true in cases of domestic violence. And we know that we can decrease homicide rates by having stricter regulations surrounding this.
Brian, we have a request from the interpreter to please
slow down.
go slower.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
You have plenty of time, so.
Okay, sorry. We know that domestic violence firearm restrictions have shown a decrease in intimate partner homicides, and this is an all too common cause of firearm-related death. And another thing, just individual choice. So we cannot, as individuals, control the actions of everyone around us, but we can make an individual choice ourselves for whether or not we want to contribute to the problem. We can decide whether or not we ourselves are going to purchase a firearm. We can decide ourselves how we're going to store our firearms, whether it's in our homes or in our cars. We know the data tells us we're safer than if we don't have one at all. But if we do decide to get one, to follow the guidelines of how to safely store. But it's not as simple as this, is it? Because if it was, we'd already fixed this problem. There's an important barrier here that I have to call out. Some of our common sense strategies get drowned out, and these get opposed. And we can't let our voices get drowned out by financial and political interests. So when we bring this up, what are we told by some people that oppose this? Well, some told us that, in a direct quote of the Second Amendment, that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, and that any attempts that we make to fight this are unconstitutional. And that's not actually true. The current Supreme Court interpretation is a little bit different, but we can certainly make progress. If you can, excuse me while I clear my voice a second. Number 2, we're told that our statistics are meaningless because some of our pediatric gun death statistics include 19-year-olds, and the 19-year-olds aren't kids. I don't know about you all, but I don't plan to love my kids any less when they're 19, nor at any age will it be acceptable if they're buried before me. So don't let these arguments distract you. We're told that any attempts to cause firearm restriction is a slippery slope, and that we're susceptible to government overreach if we do so. There's some that even try to compare this to events like the Holocaust, saying that disarming a population puts it at risk for persecution. This is obviously untrue, and is clearly fear-mongering, trying to target at-risk populations that are marginalized. In fact, we know that marginalized populations are the ones who are most at risk of gun violence. Centuries of racial injustices, from racial violence to segregation to redlining to economic disinvestment to unequal education, has led to a strong history of minority populations being disproportionately impacted by gun violence. 4, we're also told that mental health is the cause of gun violence. I fully agree that we need to expand access to mental health for all of our community members, We should also know that mental health disorders exist at similar rates in other countries, and these countries do not suffer through the gun-related carnage that we do in the United States. So again, these arguments are just distractions against the real point. So what do we know? We know that the majority of Americans do want change. So this is a Fox News poll, okay? So in what theoretically is a gun-friendly audience that answered these questions, look at these numbers. So 87% support background checks for guns, 81% support raising the legal age to 21 to buy all guns, 80% require mental health checks, 80% recommend requiring red flag laws, and 3/4 require a 30-day waiting period. That's especially pertinent because the majority of people that commit a mass shooting have obtained their firearm within the last month. So that waiting period can really make a big difference. So there is desire for change in our country. There's a small minority of firearm owners that don't want safer laws. So what are the responsibilities of all of us? Well, for those of us in the medical community, our responsibility is to produce data, to produce interventions, and educate our communities and our leaders. But as community members, our responsibilities go much deeper. So what can we do? The first thing we need to do is we need to think. We need to think for ourselves. More guns is not the solution. The data tells us that it's not. We should make efforts to avoid purchasing a gun. If we have one, we must always lock it, unload it with ammunition separate. Number two, we must speak up about injustice. Advocating for social justice, specifically advocating for reformative justice, which can give people better options than violence. It can reduce recidivism. We can choose to do our parts to set examples of how to be there for each other. We can choose to support violence interruption programs in our communities to help break the cycle of violence that plagues us. We must choose to advocate for policies that reduce economic, social, housing, and educational disparities. Again, it is not just the guns, but each part that we tackle that can make a difference. Knowledge is power, and we must spread it. Similar to COVID, we must fight disinformation when we hear it. We must be curious, and we must be challenging ourselves to learn more. We know there's so many ways that guns can lead to death: homicide, suicide, and unintentional shootings. We can know that we need to take people seriously when they say they're suicidal. We can spread our knowledge so that others learn that when we can use violence interruption programs, we can decrease homicides. And we know that locking guns is important. So we can spread this knowledge along with providing gun locks, and all of this is free. Finally, and most importantly, we must engage every time we can via civil conversation. Talk to people in our families, our workplace, our places of worship, our restaurants, our bars. Every chance we have, we must amplify our voices. If you can't vote, that's okay. Join a group that amplifies your voice, such as Moms Demand Action, Moms Rising, Everytown, March for Our Lives, and North Carolinians Against Gun Violence, just to name a few. We should be active on social media without letting it consume us, of course. And those of us that are eligible must vote. We must vote for those leaders who will protect the lives of us and our families, and vote out those that are okay with status quo. Before voting, we must learn where representatives stand on these issues and hold them accountable, not just in presidential elections or national Senate or House elections, but in what really matters are our state and local elections. These really matter so much in terms of shaping our individual environments. Most important, we need to let our kids see us doing these actions. This is how they learn that we have their backs, and this is how they have the courage to join the fight as they become adults as well. As you can see, I engage my son, my daughter, and our dog in this fight. And I'm hoping we can launch into some conversation about things that we can do to feel empowered in this, which can feel so overwhelming. Thanks again for letting me be here.